Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 group. I'm here tonight with Kat Delgrosso from College Ave Student Loans. Kat is the head of campus and event development at College Ave. I'm just going to let people kind of come in a little bit more from the waiting room. And let me tell you some housekeeping before we get started. And I'm going to do one more thing. I am going to put the captions on so that people can have that. And I'm going to stream us to Facebook in case anybody wants to watch us there. Okay, got it. So thanks for coming tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about financial aid, how it works, and of course these impending FAFSA changes. So it's a lot that Kat's going to share tonight. I run these as meetings, they're not traditional webinars, so it's nice to see you if you put your video on, and you can put questions in the chat. I will try and stop Kat if it's appropriate, but we might also hold a lot of them to the end to ask questions. But please, keep putting your questions in the chat, because sometimes you might forget and you don't have to hold it to the end. And let's get going. So tonight, as I mentioned, Kat is with a company called College Ave Student Loans. We do a lot of work with them throughout the year, and they sponsor a lot of the educational content that we're going through tonight, because quite honestly, they want to put a lot of emphasis on making sure that families understand the process. And then in the summertime, we also talk a lot about the whole loan process. So you'll be seeing a lot more of them from April through August. But tonight is all about financial aid and all of the important changes that are coming, and basically, how it works with or without the impending changes. But Kat, can you give a little background on yourself and on College Ave?
Sure. Yes, I've been with College Ave Student Loans for 5 years, actually. I just hit my 5th year anniversary. But I have been in the field of higher education this is my 30th year. And I actually worked in financial aid at a couple of colleges in upstate New York, the University of Rochester, and also Syracuse University as well. I've spent about 7 years at the College Board as well during my career, and I've worked specifically with the CSS Profile application, which I'll touch on tonight a little bit. And I guess all told, with student lending, I think I'm around 16 years in the student loan side of things. So I've kind of done a few different things within the higher education financial aid areas.
And it would be great if people could just put in the chat kind of what year your student is in high school or college, because we sent this out to families that have students in college, because a lot of these, because as you'll find out, that you need to fill out the FAFSA every year that your student is in college. So even if you have a student in college, this is new this year because of all the changes. So I'd love to know, what year people are in. And I did quickly just see, and if you're here and you're a class of if you're a sophomore or a junior, I think that's even better. I mean, if you're a senior, you have to know this information. If you have a child who's in college, you have to know it. But to be here with a junior or a sophomore, I mean, kudos to you, because now you really are learning the process before you're in it, and you will take away things from it that you might want to make changes. So it's a good time for you to hear this information. Okay, whole range, I see. So Kat, get started, and I know we have a lot to go through, and I'll monitor the questions.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. All right, welcome everyone. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and dig in here. Like I said, I've worked in financial aid, so I know how it feels to, I definitely have spoken with tons of parents and students over the years, and I know how, I know a lot of the things that are on your mind. And so I thought it would be helpful to put in the beginning of this presentation some of the misconceptions that I've heard families say over time. Some of them include things like, not thinking that you would qualify for financial aid at all. So what I want to tell you is that you shouldn't skip out on filling that FAFSA application, which is the free application for federal student aid. It's the federal form is basically required by most institutions if you're looking for any kind of need-based financial aid, but it also is sometimes required if you're looking for the merit or academic talent-based financial aid as well. So you'll just want to be cognizant of that. And that's why I feel like, since it's a free form, and because it is simplified for families next year, that you really should go ahead and fill it out. So I'll be talking more about the FAFSA throughout this presentation. Second misconception is that you might think that your income is too high to qualify. While you may not be eligible if your income is very high, and or your assets are high, while you may not qualify for some of the programs, you would definitely qualify for at least the student loan aspect, or maybe you were eligible for some need-based grants from the college itself. So even if it's not like a federal Pell Grant you may have heard of, it may actually surprise you that you could qualify for some other things directly from the institution or from the federal government or the state that in which you live. Third, you might think that your income is too low to qualify. So I have worked for a couple of colleges that are quite generous in terms of their financial aid that's available for families. So I have definitely seen this where families feel like they're not even, why bother? Because their income's too low. They're not going to be able to afford college. Please don't count yourself out in that category either, because there are a lot of things that go into figuring out financial aid eligibility. And you may be pleasantly surprised at how much you can qualify for from, again, the federal government, the state government within the state in which you live, and also definitely from the college or university. Also, I've heard many families over time. I've only worked for two very high cost private institutions, so I know this one very well. Some families say, well, I would rather just send my child to a 4-year or a 2-year or a 4-year public institution in my state because it's going to be cheaper than if I apply to a private institution. And sometimes that is true, but sometimes it's not true. There are a lot of private institutions that, while their cost or their sticker price may be high when you look at it, they may actually have quite a bit of financial aid that's available to you. And you really never know until you apply. So I would say that if the student is interested in certain private colleges or universities, that you should go ahead and put your name in the hat, because it may surprise you that you might actually qualify for more than you think. And maybe the costs of a public institution are similar to the private institution. At least if you apply, you can at least compare them apples to apples, and not wish that later on, I wish we had kind of looked into, XYZ private school. So,
and I know, Kat, you're going to get into it later, but when you say to kind of put your hat in the ring, it really means make sure you fill out the financial aid forms.
Make sure you fill out the financial aid forms. That's
right. And the schools, and some schools are going to all schools are going to require the FAFSA. And there are a smaller subset of groups that are schools that are going to require the CSS profile.
Correct. Yep. So we'll get into that, the differences between those two forms here quite a bit tonight. Lastly, there's always job loss out there, or job changes where the families are experiencing some level of fluctuation in salaries or income, especially like if you own your own business and your business income isn't consistent year over year, or as you're going to see throughout tonight, the 2022 income is going to be used for the 2024-25 year, which is the fall of 24. If your student is a senior now, and they're going to college in the fall of 24, believe it or not, it's actually it's going to pull the income from your 2022 tax year. So if you've had any kind of changes since then where your income is lower, you may be concerned that you can't afford college because there was a job loss or a salary change or something happened. And I'm here to tell you that, schools will work with you if there is a change in your income. And so please don't, if you do have this misconception, please know that it can be addressed, and it might, I can assure you that the colleges will look at that if there has been some sort of fluctuation downward with your income. Okay, so the financial aid basics. I'm going to mention a couple of acronyms because the financial aid world has a lot of acronyms. So I want to kind of set the stage here. So some of the ones that I'll mention several times tonight include the following 5. Cost of attendance, or COA, is also equal to pretty much, it's the sticker price. So if you were to go to buy a car, you would look at the sticker on the side of a new car, let's say, or a used car, and it says whatever it's going to cost. Similarly, a college has to put together a cost of attendance. And so I use those words synonymously, COA and sticker price. Second one is the EFC, or expected family contribution. That is currently in the current year what is calculated when you file your free application for federal student aid. There is an EFC that's calculated. That wording is going to be changing for next year. And so if you kind of take your eyes down to the bottom of the list, I have this listed alphabetically, but at the bottom of this list, it's called SAI. That's going to be the new number that is generated when you file the FAFSA. So it used to be called the EFC. Now it'll be called the SAI. And so I'll get more into that tonight. FSA is the Federal Student Aid organization. Basically, they are the Department of Education. They're the ones that are creating the FAFSA. They are the ones that take, basically what Congress says, and they incorporate that into the process of applying for federal aid through the FAFSA application, the free application for federal student aid. So they're kind of the entity that it all rolls through, essentially. Lastly, PJ stands for professional judgment. And that really is, let's say, for example, on like my last slide, I mentioned, like if you had a job loss or a job change where the income is different, and you want the school to take that into account, you may need to appeal for additional consideration for additional money from that college or university. And what PJ is it basically means that the college and university, they use what's called professional judgment to process your appeal. They look at that holistically, and each college may interpret it differently, but they do have the right within the federal student aid program to perform professional judgment and use, let's say, for example, your income in 2023 was lower than 2022. And you want the school to take that into account and use 2023 income. The school can use professional judgment in order to make a change to your original filing of the free application for federal student aid. So that's what that means. PJ is they're performing a PJ to give you extra consideration. Okay, the sticker price, otherwise known as the cost of attendance, or COA. So again, I'll say, don't rule out expensive colleges because it may surprise you. I worked for some pretty generous private institutions, so with high sticker prices. So, and a lot of students were obviously able to come there, and we were meeting really almost full need. So definitely consider that. Your cost of attendance is going to vary at each school. So I'm going to show you what it includes, but it's not going to match from one school to the next. It just doesn't work that way, because each school is going to charge their own tuition and et cetera. So we'll get into the components of the COA in just a moment. The cost of attendance changes every year, so it doesn't go down typically. Although there have been some colleges over the last few years with COVID who have that have frozen some of their costs and or to try to keep it steady. But I think on average, just anecdotally from over the years, and also this is kind of driven by College Board data actually, that it's typically a 2 to 4% tuition and fee increase every year, depending upon the institution. So 2 to 4% increase is pretty much the average of what you'll see. Where I think it gets kind of interesting right now is that the cost of food has gone up so much for us as Americans that you're going to find that room and board costs could fluctuate. And when I say room and board, I basically mean where's the student sleeping and living, and the board would be where are they eating? Are they eating in the dining hall, in which case they might have what's called a board plan. Or if they're living in an apartment, they might be out, buying groceries and maybe have a board plan as well or whatnot, a meal plan. But nonetheless, I think that the meals, just knowing a lot of financial aid administrators, knowing a lot of people on a lot of campuses in my current role at College Ave, it's really kind of a crazy year just in terms of those costs. So you may see that those increases are not necessarily 2 to 4%. It's going to be whatever the school needs to do to keep up with the costs, the rising costs of food and such. So the cost of attendance includes pretty much the basic costs that are needed to attend the college. The rule changed this year actually, and in the cost of attendance, they will take into account 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. Believe it or not, before 23-24, before the current year we're sitting in right now, the colleges didn't have to do that. They could have just used an average, because a lot of times students won't necessarily eat 21 meals a week in the dorm or in the dining hall, because they might just grab something quick in their room before they head off to class. And so they might not, figure they might not need breakfast every day of the week in the dining hall. Well, nowadays, the Department of Education was tasked with requiring 21 meals a week. And so that way it is helping students who have any kind of level of food insecurity to make sure that they're covered within their financial aid eligibility for eating 3 meals a day. So this is a good change. Also, the cost of attendance does include the cost of any kind of certification or credential or licensure, which may or may not be something that you will run across. It just depends upon the academic program that the student is enrolled in. Okay, so here are the 5 categories that make up cost of attendance. Tuition and fees is charged by the institution itself. Food and housing, again, could be on campus or off campus, but either way, the school is taking into account the fact that the student needs to eat and sleep somewhere. Third, books, course materials, supplies, and equipment are all categorized in this one category here. Personal expenses, which could vary by student. However, it is an average that the institution has to use when they're figuring their cost of attendance. They're needing to use some sort of average, and that would be like personal expenses would be like, hey, I've got to go buy toothpaste, just some of the everyday things that people need to live. And so that's also incorporated in the cost of attendance when figuring out your financial aid eligibility. And then lastly, there's transportation. So the transportation typically is really considering that you need to get from home to school. If you're living out of state, or if you're, living off campus, there's some level of transportation that needs to be incorporated. And typically that is also an average. I have worked for an institution in the past that used more of a radius. So it was like if you were from Rochester, New York, where I was working, it was the cost of transportation was low because you were coming locally essentially. But as you further, moved further out zip code wise, and, if you were from California, we were using a higher transportation cost for you within the total cost of attendance for you specifically versus someone who might have been from the same town as the school. So it is dependent upon however the college wants to do it. It's not consistent necessarily, but most of it's really like an average that they're using. But certainly you can always ask the school, you know, what do you use in your transportation? How do you come up with your average? So, okay. Common questions that families ask. So what is financial aid? It's really 4 main groups. You're either getting free money that you don't have to pay back, which would be considered either grants or scholarships. The grants are typically need-based. So you're applying for financial aid. They're determining whether you have need, and if you do, the school is providing you with need-based grants, hopefully, if you have need. Scholarships would be more academic or merit talent-based things, and they are also free money that you don't have to pay back. The third category is work, and so the student would typically work between 8 and 15 hours a week on campus. You don't want to overdo it with work because the student needs to also spend money or spend time on their studies, of course. But I would say on average, 8 to 15 hours per week was what students comfortably worked, you know, when I spent time on campuses. And then lastly, the loan programs. This could vary between student programs as well as what the parents can take, or even other people like a grandparent or maybe a legal guardian and that sort of thing. Okay, so how do the students and families apply or qualify? So you apply using the forms I'm about to talk about a little bit further. A need is calculated, a financial need is calculated. So that's going to be something that the schools need to, they'll take your financial aid application, they'll determine how much family contribution you can contribute towards college, and then they'll figure out how much you need, and then they will subsequently provide you with either grants, scholarships, work, or loans based on the need that was calculated. And then the money comes from 4 different main sources. You're either getting money from the federal government or you're getting it from your state government. So let's say you live in the state of Pennsylvania, you would be getting it from money from the state of Pennsylvania. Colleges or universities, that typically is like a larger chunk that you can qualify for, because depending upon the college or university, and if you have a lot of need, you might see that the money that you get from the school is actually a lot higher than what you're getting from the federal or state government. And then lastly, you can also apply for outside scholarships from local organizations, maybe in your backyard, such as, like, you know, wherever the parent works. Maybe they have an outside scholarship program that's available to children of parents who work there, and so it's worth looking into to see if you can qualify for anything like that. Other local organizations might be, let's say, churches or Elks clubs and Walmarts and local places that basically want to support students who are going to college from their towns. And other types of examples we'll go over here in a little bit.
Can I ask a question before we get too far away from this? Somebody asked, and I think you didn't have it listed, in cost of attendance, is health insurance factored in?
Yeah. So yeah, the health insurance. So sometimes the colleges are requiring you. So sometimes the colleges will want you to indicate whether or not the student is covered under your health insurance personally. Like they won't charge you for health insurance unless the student isn't covered under your health insurance otherwise.
Well, actually, just to be fair, they put it on the bill. You need to then, a lot of schools, and you need to then prove that your student is covered, and then they take it off.
Yeah, and it's a lot of money. So yeah. You're going to want to peruse your bill closely. And if it is there, like Debbie said, sometimes they plop it on there, assuming that everyone needs to pay for that. And if they did assume that the health insurance, you know, that if they charge you for it, they are possibly also taking it into account within the 5 categories under think that one would fall under the number one, which would be the health insurance fee. So so yeah, just keep an eye out for that on your bill just to see. And you're welcome to ask the school well ahead of that. So when they figure out your financial aid, are they also like, are they taking into account in number one here, the health insurance fee? And then if you show proof that the student is already covered under a health insurance plan that you have outside of the college setting through your work, then they will remove the fee, but they also will probably remove it from your cost of attendance. So it's going to be like 6 or half dozen. So just make sure that you are not being charged for something that you don't need. And if you do need it, make sure that they're taking that into account within the cost of attendance so that you're also being considered for financial aid accordingly.
So another question is, when you fill out the FAFSA, and I know I personally haven't seen it. I don't know if you've seen anything that since it's all new, but will your SAI be presented at the right away? Like in the past, your EFC was there. People didn't always recognize that they were going to get it, and they kind of the information kind of flew by. But when are you actually going to see your SAI in this new world?
Yeah, so your SAI is actually is shown on the top right of your when you're done filing the form, the FAFSA, it actually will show on the top right of your kind of your summary page or your submission page. It's going to be called a FAFSA submission summary next year, and previously it was called a student aid report. So the student aid report in the old days, the old days meaning the current days.
Right.
The student aid report currently does show the EFC on the top right. But when we go to the new FAFSA, the new redesigned FAFSA in 24-25, it's just going to be called a FAFSA submission summary. It's the same idea, basically. Some of the words are just changing here. But SAI will be on the top right.
Okay, so you will kind of get it immediately after filling it out.
Yep, you'll get it immediately. But if you are applying to a school that requires the CSS Profile application, which is administered by the College Board, and we'll get into that a little bit here, but it does not print on it it does not show like a family contribution or any kind of index as to how much you need to pay. So that is one big difference between the two forms. You don't actually see any kind of number on the submission that they have. I think I've pretty much covered this when I was talking through the different types. So I think I'm going to go ahead and skip this because I mentioned all about the free money versus not. Just, loans need to be paid back. Work, you're getting money throughout school. It helps the student get a little bit of working during college has always been sort of controversial, I suppose, for some, because families are concerned they don't want the student to spend too much time working where they're taking away their time from studying. So if the student is working on campus, there is a good balance where they're getting really good experience and they're building relationships. And quite honestly, they're kind of building a resume right then and there. Because they're networking with people, they're meeting all kinds of people who will later help them somewhere. So I would actually recommend the work part, but it depends upon the student and what they're able to do. So you know your family best, so whether or not it's appropriate. But if you are offered a program through, let's say, federal work study or something from the college, it is a good consideration because it does help you build your network and build your resume for whenever you're getting ready to graduate and you need an application to a job, you already have a network of people that maybe another student who didn't work on campus, doesn't have the exact same thing. So it is really helpful. Okay. So the main federal program, so again, there's 4 types. So federal, state, money from the college, and then other, kind of in an other category. So in terms of federal aid, the types are Pell Grants, SEOG, which is the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Those first two, the Pell and SEOG, are given to the highest need families. So you may or may not see it based upon your family contribution, but those are federal programs, and they are need-based. The federal work-study program is need-based, but sometimes colleges do have non-need-based work available, of course. So that is it could be need-based or not need-based in terms of working on campus. And then the federal direct loans for students that are subsidized, that means the government is subsidizing the interest while the student is enrolled. So what does that mean? That basically means that no interest is accruing while the student is there at college on a subsidized loan. Okay, on the other side of this, we have federal programs that are not need-based. So one is for veterans or children of veterans through the post 9/11 GI Bill. It's a very generous program. So if that is something, if that is you, that is going to cover a large amount of your cost depending upon how much service you served. And so that you'll definitely want to look into. Direct loans that are not subsidized are available. So these are basically loans where the interest is accruing during school because the government is not subsidizing the interest while you're there, while the student's there. So between the subsidized and unsubsidized direct loans, you can get, you're basically eligible for $5,500 in the freshman year, $6,500 in the sophomore year, and $7,500 for junior year and $7,500 for senior year. So 55, 65, 75, 75. Those are the amounts that you can get for a 4-year degree. And then there's also direct loans for graduate level students as well later on, if that applies to you. There are also federal plus loans, which are the parent loans for undergraduate students. And there's also a graduate level one as well. And then teach grants are for students who are looking into being teachers in certain low socioeconomic areas. So they're basically willing to take some time after college, after they graduate, to teach in those areas. And then and so that's what the Teach Grant program is for. Okay, the second main category is state aid. So this is something where you're going to want to look at the link at the bottom there. Studentaid.gov has a nice handy checklist of each state in the country and what their deadlines are. So the great news is that, well, there's no bad news here. The great news is all the states have some program now. It used to be that like New Hampshire was a holdout, but now everybody has a state program of some sort. The dollar amounts that the states give you will vary. It depends. It depends. Some of them are low amounts. Some of them are thousands and thousands of dollars. So it can be quite generous. And you definitely want to make sure that you apply. Some additional good news is that you can apply immediately following the FAFSA application. So as soon as you're done, the FAFSA, it will actually, if you just want to make sure you're reading the screens, it will prompt you to move right over into the state application. In some cases, the states are just even taking just the FAFSA and that's it now. So they might not even have a supplemental extra thing you have to file at the end of the FAFSA. But either way, when you get done the FAFSA, make sure you're reading and looking for the state grant connection at the end there. And depending upon what state you're from, it'll basically ask you whatever they want to ask you at that point. And so that allows you to be considered for state grants or scholarships or loans in each of the states in which you live. So there are some states that actually allow you to take the money over state lines. So let's say, for example, you're from North Carolina, and I don't know the North Carolina program, I'm just throwing this out here, but let's say you're from the state of North Carolina and they have whatever their state grant program is, and they want you to stay in state, so they don't allow it to cross state lines, like over into South Carolina, etc. Or maybe North Carolina does allow you to go into like adjacent states. So there are some states that allow you to do that, like Pennsylvania. They do have some provisions where they allow you to go over the state lines and take the state money over those state lines. So you'll just want to make sure that you know, because if you're applying only to out-of-state colleges, you may not be able to take your money over to those colleges. So yeah, that would be one thing is good for you to know now versus finding out kind of at the late in the game. So let's see. The last thing I'll say is about the deadlines. So some states have very, very early deadlines. That's why it's important to look at the screen, this URL link I have at the bottom, because like I think, for example, like the state of Illinois is very early. So when you apply in, let's say the student is a senior and you're applying for the fall of 2024 to go to college, and you're from the state of Illinois, I'm sure the deadline is still early. I didn't hear that they had pushed it much later or anything. Just, you know, be cognizant of the fact that you need to meet their deadline or you're not going to be considered for their a grant program if their deadline is way early. Whereas, you know, like in the state of New York, where I worked for a long time, New York had a very generous deadline, like it was very ample. And so you just want to make sure that you know what it is for your state. And then it is helpful to know whether or not you can take that money over the state lines. Third category is colleges and university money. So this is where you can get a lot of money sometimes, especially if it's a higher cost institution, because it's all relative, you know, like if it's a 4-year or a 2-year public school, they may not have that much of their own money to spend on you. But the higher cost private schools, where their costs might be really high, they may, you know, also have a high amount of money that they're able to spend through their endowed scholarships and need-based grant funding. So, so that's hopefully something that you'll benefit from. And then, one thing, sometimes they will have their own institutional loans. That is not something that every college has, but I did list it on here as a bullet point because I have had that experience where I worked at schools that had their own program. It was like a low interest loan, but it was a limited amount. It wasn't like they were willing to let you borrow, you know, a lot. I think our cap at the time was like $8,000 or something. So it's not always a huge amount of money, but you'll want to ask, you know, do you have your own loans on campus that we can tap into and borrow through? And I will say not every school has that. So fourth category is basically kind of an other category. These are things that are like private. It's money that's from somewhere else. It's not federal, it's not state, it's not institutional from the college. It's coming from somewhere else. So it might be an outside scholarship, like I mentioned before, where you're getting something local to your, you know, churches or your organizations or businesses in your town or city. Then you can kind of look beyond that in a regional way. Like, okay, I'm from Boston, and let's say I'm from Boston and I'm looking locally within the town I live, but then I'm also looking for some regional scholarships for Boston, or maybe even like for Massachusetts residents, let's say. And then there are also some outside scholarships or that are more on a national level, like the National Merit Scholarship that is through the College Board's PSAT exam. That's an example of a national award. So anyway, there are lots of different search engines to look for these types of scholarships. They are, let's see, FastWeb is a big example of a search engine that is quite popular. I know CapEx has one, College Board as well. There are many examples of search engines that you can start narrowing down. But I honestly think sometimes that looking locally is a good way to add up like $250, $500, $1,000. And if you start to win those types of things that are on the local scale, they do add up, and all of a sudden you may end up with like $3,000, and you know, it might not be as hard as maybe getting one of the national ones. So, and then private loans are an option as well. You know, like where I work, that's, you know, we offer basically private loans to cover the gap between your cost of attendance, and any other financial aid that you've already received. So there are ways to fill up that gap to finance what you need to cover your family contribution.
Kat, sorry, there were a lot of questions about work study. It's just to repeat, it's need-based. So a college will offer it or include it in the package, you know, as another form of aid. Is there a certain need level that a student has to get work study, or is that college dependent? They make the decision, and even though they're offered it, are they guaranteed to get it?
So so if it's through the federal program, it is a limited pool of funding that the school has to spend. So they're essentially given they're given a pot of money from the Department of Education, and they only have so much to give out. And on average, you know, you might see anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 on average that would be on your financial aid award. And that would allow you to work, you know, like I said, between 8 and 15 hours a week throughout the year and that sort of thing. But if the school runs out of funding and they only give it to like the neediest students, the ones who have a calculation of the highest need levels, because if you think about it, like if the government only gives them, let's say, I don't know, $500,000 to spend of federal work study, they're going to start with the neediest students, and then either that or they're going to give less to more students. So however they do it is up to them, each college, but on average, I'd say you're probably looking at between 1,000 and, well, maybe even 2,500 in an award on your financial aid if you have need for it. And are you guaranteed a job? No, it depends, because probably these days is a really good chance the student's going to get a job, because I think some schools are finding similarities as we are out in the consumer life of not having enough help at stores or restaurants and things like that. So I think I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there's probably a lot of opportunities that are there that I think in general there's it's not like they advertise that you get this money and then, you know, like oversell it like an airline where they're giving out money and then there's not enough jobs to fill it. I think on average they really try hard through the career services areas of those schools, which again, make sure that you kind of write that down. Career services is definitely it's either career services or it's going to be student employment. The name of the office will vary, but the student will be given an opportunity to look at probably a huge list of jobs that are open, and then they can apply and then interview, and then it's not a rigorous type of interview. These are things I'm going to tell you that work study students, colleges love work study students. They love them. I loved them. We had great work study students in our office and financial aid everywhere I worked. They really, really make a difference for us in the offices. So we love them, and hopefully the students find it a good opportunity as well. So I don't think it's a matter of like, if you get it on your award, you're out of luck and you don't have a chance of getting a job. I think in general, you probably will find a job. So it's best to work with that student employment office and get advice about it. But I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that was helpful.
Can't guarantee anything, you know, because every school is different. But I mean, in general, they want those students to work there. They love them. So, and also, technically, I remember you saying, or how the question was phrased, like you have to have need. So technically there are non-need based, non-federal work study jobs that are also available. They may be publicized differently, like on a different list. So like, for example, let's say you're looking at a whole job board through the student employment office or career office at the school, and it might have a literal box on there that says, or an asterisk that says federal work study eligible or federal work study required. If it's required, then, and you don't have need-based federal work study, then you wouldn't be able to apply there. But there's going to be jobs that are on campus that don't require federal work study. So you'll want to look for those. And also I'll say on this slide too, related to it is, if you don't meet the deadlines of the school's their financial aid deadlines, that may also hurt you in terms of not being able to get work study. Because again, they only get a limited pool of funding, and once it's gone, it's gone. Once they've handed it out, it's gone. So at least kind of on the front end anyway. I mean, I don't know if it eventually irons itself out where there's some available later, but for the most part, they put it out there on the streets as available funding pushed out to you guys. And then if you apply late, you may be out of luck on the certain limited programs like federal work study. And also SEOG is one of those limited programs as well, the federal SEOG program. They also only get a pool of funding for that too. So deadlines are important. And I know that sounds like, it's not rocket science. But if I were you, I would probably keep track on a spreadsheet or a good old fashioned paper method, whatever you want to do, but be very cognizant of what the deadlines are for not only the admissions application, but the financial aid applications at the institutions to which you're applying. Because you definitely want to be considered for everything. And in order to do that, you really have to meet those deadlines. Okay, so I will say this, the FAFSA application for 24-25 is delayed. It's normally going to come out October 1st. But this year it is delayed until December something. And I don't know the date yet because the Department of Education hasn't announced the date. The only thing that they have said is December has 31 days, so it could be anytime. So you may find yourself over the holidays filling out the FAFSA, but technically December 1st is what is it, next? No, not next week.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So anytime after December 1st, we'll be looking for it. But I got to tell you, the people in the financial aid industry are not real hopeful that it's going to be available earlier in the month. So, but just keep your eyes peeled. Again, it's studentaid.gov. That is the official website. Don't use a different website because that's the free website and we don't want you paying for a FAFSA. So studentaid.gov is the one you're going to be watching for. Okay, so here's the timing. So here's the situation. So if you're applying early decision, that means that right now is November 14th. So if the student really wants to go to a college, and I know there's some sophomores and juniors on this call too. So if you are sure as anything that you would like to go to, Purdue, and you've always wanted to go to Purdue and that's where you want to go, and they got everything you want socially, academically, emotionally, all that good stuff there. You would apply early decision if you're really sure that's where you want to try for. And the timing on that usually is like a November deadline to hear something in December or maybe early January. But usually December. So you apply by usually November 1st or November 15th. And you typically will hear in December. Now that the FAFSA is late this year only, this is a 1-year problem here. This is not a problem that should reoccur. The FAFSA is late only for the 24-25 year, but for 25-26, we should be back on track. They should be putting that application out again on October 1 of 24. And but for this year, so for you seniors out there, the timing for early decision will probably be pushed a tad bit because they don't have your FAFSA. So if it was in December, it might be more likely January this time, possibly even early February. If you're a part of the early action program, what does that mean? That basically means that okay, I kind of just want to apply to the, I don't know, 6 schools I'm interested in, but I want to do it early. I don't want to kind of deal with it later on, like in March or February. I just want to get the decisions out of the way. It's not a binding contract. Like early decision is, if you're accepted, you're going there. So if you're accepted and your financial aid is as you need it, early decision means you're locking in for that one school. Early action, on the other hand, is you apply to multiple schools, but you're doing it early, and then you still typically will have a May 1st deadline to say that, yes, I'm going to come here, but at least you're getting your information early on. Regular decision is really like the bulk. A lot of people apply just that way because they're not sure where they want to go. They also don't feel like applying early. They're in their senior year. There's a lot going on. And so regular decision is really sort of the typical process flow, and that would be the majority, a large percentage, I shouldn't say majority, but a large percentage of people who are really going this route, and they're applying by, let's say, February deadlines, and they are normally told whether or not they're admitted and how much their financial aid is in March. But this year with the FAFSA, it's potentially could push to April. So just be aware of that with this late FAFSA application. It's really messing up things in terms of the timing. But again, I'll say it again, it's a 1-year problem. So it's not, it's, if you're a junior or a senior, a junior or a sophomore out there, this should be rectified by the time you apply. So, but for those folks who are seniors on the call, this is kind of a little bit of a weird year timing wise. And then the last category of admissions is rolling or open admission. So those would be places that are totally fine with you applying at any given time. They let you know usually within 2 weeks if you're accepted and how much financial aid you're eligible for. So they're going to have a push on their financial aid notification too, because they don't have the FAFSA to get your information for financial aid on there. But that's a process that that you can, that's the 4th category, if you will, of admission application types. Any questions on that, Debbie, that you think I should address? These are the normal timeframes, and just know that for 24-25, it could be a little later than what I'm telling you here.
We had a few questions about if a student does apply early action, early decision, do you think it impacts the amount of aid that they could receive?
Okay, that's a good question. So most of the time, no. It could impact some of their merit scholarships, but it really depends on the school. So if I were you, I would almost want to ask the admissions or financial aid, maybe look at their website. I don't know if they would disclose that on their website. I think it would be more of maybe a personal conversation. So if it's a school you really want to go to, maybe you go ahead and ask that school. If you're looking at 10 different schools, I mean, I know how much trouble that is to call, I'm going to call all 10 of these and ask them the same question. I mean, that takes some work. So, in general, I mean, we didn't package students differently if they applied early. When I worked at the 2 schools, we were pretty much doing similar things, with maybe the exception of they might, the running low on SEOG or federal work study funds, which are the 2 limited pools of funds. But the schools are smart enough to know to reserve some for regular decision though. So even that is, I don't think you're at risk for applying regular decision. There is one thing I will say though, from an admissions standpoint. So if let's say you are really interested, I use Purdue as an example out in Indiana. Let's say you really wanted to go there. If you really wanted to go there, you probably have gone to campus at some point. You probably have gone to the school and you have interviewed with someone from the admissions office. They love to see your intent is strong. If you're applying like an early decision, type of program, if you've done some of those extra things, they're going to be able to notice that, wow, Kat really wants to go to Purdue. She's visited here twice and she interviewed with our admissions, counselors and whatever. I mean, I think there's, or maybe your essay is really like show something, a little zing in there about Purdue or whatever. But I would just say that that is something that admissions offices look at, because if you've shown a lot of excitement, they're probably going to catch that really quickly. So
Kat, there's a kind of a conversation going on about we're not quite sure when the FAFSA is really gonna, become available sometime in December, could be December 31st. And what's the likelihood that it, will kind of be stable those first few days with everybody kind of going on and trying to, put in their FAFSA, really, will it go down? And what is the harm about even like waiting a week or two after it technically opens?
there is no harm.
Right.
No, because here's the thing. The FAFSA used to kick off January 1st every year of my career until, it's been a few years now, but like, I don't know, over 20 of my years of 30 years, the FAFSA always kicked off January 1st. They only moved it back to October 1st somewhat recently. So schools were used to getting your FAFSA data late anyway. There is a and when they moved it to October 1st, everybody thought that they had to get it done October 1st. It was like, there's no deadlines October 1st. I can assure you of that. All the colleges have deadlines of either November 1 or later. I don't know of a single one that has any financially deadlines prior to November 1st. And if there are, that they're an anomaly. Most schools do not have a deadline that early in October. So you have time anyway on a regular year. And so do you have to do it the day it comes out? Absolutely not. And that's why I say you want to look at the deadlines that the schools have, because they know the FAFSA is going to be late this year. Believe me, they know. They're very well aware of it. And it's kind of stressing them out a little bit, because they know that they have a crunch time. They're going to have to plow through a lot of work in a shorter period of time. So just be cognizant of that in terms of like response times. If you are waiting for them to get back to you, they might, they're just inundated. They're going to be inundated but not to panic. They have been well prepared for this. This was actually a law that was approved by Congress in 2019 and 2020. There's two different laws. So they've known this is coming, but they still only have a finite number of employees to get through the work. So, just be patient. They will probably be publicizing on their websites that there could be delay. They might even be telling you the timing on their websites too. So that's what I would recommend, is checking out their website, see if they're mentioning any timing. And the site could definitely have some issues on day one. It is a complete redesign of the application. So yeah, but it'll be okay. It's going to be okay.
Right. But don't also feel the pressure like, oh my God, it just opened. I need to, it's not like you have to be first in line. Not at all.
Don't have to be first in line at all. You don't have to do it the first day. Like, I would actually, if I were you, I'd probably avoid the first day.
Exactly.
Yeah. So. Because I will also tell you that there's not going to be a school with a deadline of the first day the FAFSA is ready. There's no way a school would do that. That would be, they wouldn't do that. They're not in that mind space. They know that everybody's going to be delayed, families and them. So we just have to deal with it for 1 year here. So I've talked a lot about the FAFSA. Make sure you're using that URL address there. That's the official one. And most colleges will use the FAFSA, but either way, there are a sprinkle of schools that don't participate in the federal program. So therefore they don't require the FAFSA, but they are very few and far between. So just assume that you're going to have to do the FAFSA if you want any kind of consideration for any need-based aid and possibly merit-based aid as well, depending upon the schools. And then I mentioned the state grants linking at the end. Okay, so the CSS Profile is the other application that's only required by about 300 colleges in the country. These are schools that have a large amount of money to spend on you. And in order to do that, they want to get extra data beyond what the FAFSA provides to them. And it helps them kind of divide up how much they can afford to give to each individual family. So it gives them a better picture of the family's ability to pay. And I realize that it can be stressful for you because now you have to file 2 forms potentially instead of 1. But it is because they are the ones that have the most money a lot of times. So sometimes they also ask in a divorce separated situation with families where there's the divorce families or you're living separately in some way, they may require you to fill out a separate CSS profile, both biological parents. So the one the student is getting more than half of their support from, but also the other parent as well. And that's not the case at every institution. So that became available October 1st. So let me show you that application. So it's cssprofile.org. And if you look here on their main, on the main page here, right under the purple, you can see check participating schools and scholarships. So some scholarship organizations use this to collect data so the scholarship can give out their money. They use the profile for you to apply. There are a few of those. But this will give you a list of it's about 300 schools that use the CSS profile. And so let's say you want to look at, I don't know, Boston College. Actually, let me use one that's not below the fold here. How about Babson College? So in Babson College in the Boston area, they require the CSS profile for domestic students. They also use it for international students. They also require the non-custodial parent to fill out their own FAFSA, so that other biological parent I just mentioned. And then they also use the IDOC process, which stands for Income Documentation Service, and it basically means that you can handily submit your tax return data through one portal, and it can go to a variety of schools. So they do participate with the College Board's IDOC process. You will see, though, some schools, let's say, how about American here? American in DC uses the profile for domestic students, but not for international. And they do require it for non-custodial, the other biological parent. But you're going to see some schools here that say no when it comes to the other biological parent. So, you know, just check this and see if your school's on here. This is an example of a scholarship foundation, Buttonwood Foundation. They have a scholarship that's available, and they require people to fill out the profile to request to be considered. Okay, so that's the site, and that's the portal I would look at, just because it'll help you understand which schools that you're considering need the profile. And then lastly, there may be some schools that they don't use the CSS profile, but they want to collect some additional information beyond the FAFSA, so they might have their own application. They would typically be free. I didn't mention this, I'm sorry. The CSS profile does charge a fee. It's $25 for the first college and $16 for each additional college. But they have a lot of fee waivers now. So if your family makes $100,000 or less, there is no fee for you to file the CSS profile. So those are the 3 forms. You may only have to do one of them. And when you do the FAFSA, you're basically applying for up to 20 schools all at once. And then all 20 schools get, or however many you're picking, let's say it's 5 or 10 or 12 or up to 20. All of those schools will get your data. The CSS profile has an unlimited, well, pretty much unlimited number of schools that you can.
Ooh, Kat, I think you froze. Let me see. Sorry about that. Let's see. let me try, because she unfortunately also has the slides. So let me see if I can get a hold of her. Yep, okay, and I'm gonna guess she's gonna try and come back on. Let me make sure. We will look for her. Okay, while we're waiting, I will just go through, I've been answering a lot of questions. And I've been putting links for people who are kind of new to this whole process about what the CSS profile is. It's basically for those private schools who want to ask for additional information. I also want to clarify that you do need to fill out, if a school is asking for the CSS profile, you need to fill out CSS Profile and FAFSA. FAFSA is like the basic. You need to fill that out for all the schools. You just for CSS Profile schools, you're going to need to do 2 forms as well. So let me see what other questions we have. I think I might actually have the slides, but I'm going to see if Kat can get back on. Okay, so some people are asking about, I will really urge you, if your student is applying to a school with a CSS profile, to check the deadlines. People are asking, so there was a major early decision deadline, obviously November 1st, November 15th is coming up. There's a December 1st, there's a December 15th. And you need to, usually, I mean, if it's December 15th, you can send it in December 15th, but I would have hoped maybe you would have done it, a few days before. If you miss these deadlines, the schools aren't usually, that forgiving. So please, check at the school's deadlines. Is the CSS deadline per school not a general one? Great question. It is per school. So you definitely look at each college's deadline dates. Any college that requires CSS will have their own CSS deadlines, right, which they publish on their website. Thank you. Let me just checking if Kat is emailing me or not. Nope. Okay. If you guys can hold on, sorry about this. I will actually pull up the slides. I have to just find them. So somebody's asking, yes, can we make the slides available? Yes, I can do it.
Hi, Debbie, I'm
Oh,
back.
yes, Kat, I was looking for the slides.
I don't know if it was me or I got bumped out, so
Okay.
apologize.
You froze. You did freeze for a few minutes,
froze? Okay.
and then we lost you. But okay, glad you're back.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I'm sitting here in a stable environment, internet-wise, but okay. Shall I continue on?
Yes.
Is that okay? Okay. So I hope that, I don't know where I got cut off, but I had been talking about the 3 applications. I basically kind of was.
Yeah, it was about here.
About here. Okay.
Yeah.
And we've already talked about this type of thing, so I'm going to move past that. So in terms of the deadlines being, October 1, it was the kickoff of the CSS profile, which I don't know if you heard me say before. And for the FAFSA, it should be in December, but normally it's going to be October 1 in the subsequent years.
The only thing I was emphasizing, Kat, because there were some questions, was that a few people asked, if the school is asking for the CSS profile, do I still need to fill out the FAFSA? And the FAFSA is kind of just a given. And even actually, maybe one more thing to clarify, if the students have applied early in this particular year, colleges are still going to come back with their admissions decisions. Some colleges, like the early action colleges, may not offer their financial aid decisions or their, until the FAFSA is filled out. A lot of the early decision schools will probably still are going to give out a financial aid offer, even though the FAFSA isn't available. And they might, obviously you're going to still have to fill out the FAFSA and they may adjust it, but they're going to give you a sense of what it is.
Yeah, I've actually talked to several colleges that are trying to get something out the door at least before December for those earlier programs. And then they'll look at the FAFSA later to figure out like how much federal Pell Grant you might get or something, but they are trying to figure out their grant money earlier because they don't want you to have to wait that long. So I have talked to several schools that are doing that. And they tend to be more of the private institutions. The other thing too is that if they have, here's a benefit of a CSS Profile institution. They have your data. If you did it after October 1, anytime in the fall, they're going to get your information earlier than a school that doesn't use the CSS Profile. So, and if that school is just sort of waiting only on the FAFSA, the schools that use the CSS profile are actually at an advantage, and you are too, because you're going to hear earlier. So anyway, so which parent information to include? So if both parents are married, then both of your data goes on both the FAFSA and the CSS Profile. Let's say the parents are remarried and there's a step parent involved. The parent plus the step parent data is going to go on the FAFSA and the profile. And then the third bullet is where we're looking at a family that is either divorced, separated, or never married. That's going to be whoever provides greater than half the support. So previously it used to be, where does the student live? Going forward in 24-25, it's going to be which parent provides greater than half of the support. And it may or may not be where the student lives. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but the CSS Profile, I've already said this, but they may require that other biological parent to fill out their own separate profile. But when it comes to the FAFSA is going to be looking at a married unit, both parents on that application. If they're remarried, it's going to be a one biological parent and a step parent on there. When you have a divorced or a separated situation or never married, there's only one parent that goes on the FAFSA. If you're not remarried, it'll just be whatever parent provides greater than half the support. That's who's going on that FAFSA. So I don't know if there's any questions on that. There's always questions related to this, but it is changing for 24-25 in the sense that it's not necessarily where the student lives. You're supposed to put down where the student's getting more than half of their support. So here's kind of where the rubber meets the road related to what's asked for on the applications. So again, it's 2022 income that's going to slide into the that's going to be required for both forms for 24-25. And they're going to be doing it differently with the new redesigned FAFSA. It's the number in the family is normally how they do it, but they're going to actually just pull this from your tax return. So if you have 4 exemptions on your tax return from 2022, but you were taking care of, let's say, a grandparent, and you were helping give money towards a grandparent who might have been in like an assisted living, or maybe I use that as an example because that seems like I don't know, it's a good example really, because you could be like sending money to help grandma in another facility, but she doesn't live with you and you didn't put her on your tax return. So for 24-25 and going forward, in that example, those 4 exemptions would be your family size and grandma wouldn't be counting, but you may want the financial aid office to take into account grandma because you're putting forth a lot of money towards her expenses in my example. So just know that the original FAFSA that you file, you can always appeal for the school to be able to do a professional judgment, which you remember that PJ acronym I mentioned earlier. That's where they would do a PJ, a professional judgment, to say, okay, we'll allow you to count grandma in the household, but I'm going to tell you that the FAFSA, the original FAFSA that's filed, once you consent on there to pull your data in from the IRS, which by the way, you have to do, or there will be no student aid index calculated. There's no SAI calculated unless you give consent to pull your stuff in from the IRS. There are exceptions, and those are people who don't file a tax return, let's say, or who only have untaxed income, let's say, or they don't file a tax return because they're lower income. Maybe they're on a fixed, getting retirement only or something like that.
And so, Kat, and I can't remember if you have this later in the slides, but to that point, when you just said that the parent has to give permission so that the taxes information is pulled from the IRS, isn't for that reason, both parents now need to create an FSA ID.
Yes.
When in the past, you didn't actually have to have both parents filling it out.
Right. So anybody who's going to be on that FAFSA has to have an FSA ID. And remember earlier I said FSA stands for Federal Student Aid. Those are the Department of Education people who are creating this FAFSA for you to file. They have an FSA ID, and so there would be one for Kat and one for Kat's mom and one for Kat's dad or other mom or whoever the people are. Whoever's on that FAFSA application needs to have an FSA ID, and each person who's on there has to provide their consent. So it's going to be a box to check on there that says, yes, I consent for you to pull in my information as a direct data exchange, it's called, from the IRS. And it's convenient for you because they're pulling it in from the IRS, and there's really it's a more improved process than the current process, because there already is a process to pull it in from the IRS, but it's going to be a little bit more streamlined. Essentially, that's kind of the bottom line of it in 24-25. When they're pulling from the IRS, there's some important things here. So one is the number of exemptions on your tax return from 2022 will be pulled in. Again, if in my grandma example, if grandma's getting some money from you, but she's not an exemption, it's not going to pull into the original FAFSA. I mean, but yes, you can appeal on it. But I'm just telling you what the original FAFSA is going to be. The other thing that's kind of a big change, yes, there's going to be taxable income. It's all going to pull in from your tax return. So like all the fields that are in your tax return, like adjusted gross income or interest income, business income, anything that's coming in from the tax return will dump in there into the FAFSA application conveniently. And what does that mean? That means it's less work for you to have to type it in, essentially. Here's something that's kind of a big change, and that's the third row, which is certain untaxed income used to be on the FAFSA, and it won't be for 24-25. And those are things like anything that comes from a W-2 form is no longer dumping into the FAFSA, is no longer going to be a required field. So that's good for you, because if you put money back in your 401k in 2022, or you have a 403b or something like that, anything that shows up on that W-2 form, but it's not anywhere else, it's not going to get counted as income now towards your financial aid eligibility. So that's going to help you in the calculation for sure. For those folks who are applying at schools that still require the CSS profile, sorry, bad news on that. You will have to require, it does look at all the untaxed income. But again, those CSS profile schools are the ones with the most money. So it's, it's a toss up here. But I put this chart together because I think it's helpful. I'm a visual person. So just to see the differences here. I would like to also note in my grandma example there that the profile allows you to list grandma. So because you're putting the number in the family on the CSS profile. So in my example of you had 4 exemptions, but you're helping out grandma a lot with greater than half of her support, I'm going to put 5 in my family on the CSS profile, even though there's only 4 over on the FAFSA. And then the CSS Profile schools will use the 5 instead of the 4, which will help you in the calculation. So that's a benefit of the CSS Profile there. Okay, so moving down the line here, there's some similarities, but some big things. So something that I understand could be changed. So there was an initial I don't want to call it misinterpretation. There was an interpretation by the Department of Education that 529 plans, which are the qualified education plans, would not have to go on the FAFSA, except for just the student that's applying to college. I have been hearing recently at conferences that I'm attending, this is like heavy conference season for me, so I'm at a conference like every week, that it is possibly that interpretation was incorrect by the Department of Ed, and you may end up having to put your 529 plans on the FAFSA for not just the student, but all the siblings that you've saved for. So that's how it always was. They've always asked for 529 plans for the student plus any siblings where you've saved money in those qualified education plans. They require you to put all of that down as a parent asset. Well, there was talk in the last month that, or two, really, or more actually, that the 529 plans were only going to be just for the student. But I am gathering now that that is the changing, and that once the FAFSA comes out in December, you are possibly going to see the question and the wording of the help pages that you have to put it down for the siblings too. So
I was honestly surprised when I saw that change in the new FAFSA.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would just say that it's evolving. And so I've been presenting on this stuff for a couple of months now, but as I'm learning, well, basically until that FAFSA is filed, till that thing is on the street, things can change. And the Department of Ed has gone back and forth with this topic, and it may be that you have to put it down for all of the family members. So just FYI. Business net worth, that one is definitely changing. So before, if you have a business and you own your own business, so you're an employee of one, or maybe you own it with a couple of siblings or some other people, and you have like a company that's got 50 employees or something. If you had fewer than 100 employees, you didn't have to list your net worth on the FAFSA before. So small businesses, no net worth on the FAFSA. The CSS Profile required it, but the FAFSA didn't. Well, the FAFSA is now going to count that. So even if you have a business of one employee, or a small business, essentially, I couldn't consider it any small business, you have to put all your net worth of that business, regardless of the number of employees, now on the FAFSA for 24-25. That's a big change for people. Yeah. Also, home equity was not on the FAFSA before, and now it will be for 24-25. So that is also a big change, because the CSS Profile had it. Now the FAFSA will have it. And then lastly, the FAFSA is kind of aligning with the CSS Profile in the sense that it's asking you to put your farm equity down. So home equity is basically the value minus the debt against it equals equity. So if you have a home equity loan, that's considered debt. So you would also subtract that from so value minus your mortgage minus your home equity loan or loans equals your home equity amount that the form will use. Similarly, the farm equity, so it used to be that the FAFSA didn't require that if it was your primary residence, but now they will be counting any farm. Again, value minus debt. The debt could be like, okay, I have farm equipment, and so I'm still paying on that stuff. That's your debt, and so the equity is kind of like value minus debt equals equity on the farm too. So that's going to be counted now, even if it is your primary residence. So I don't know how many people on the call are in that situation, but anyway, that's going to be counted as well. I'm going to scoot back over to the right side again here. So there's a lot of similarities now. That's almost like the FAFSA is aligning a little bit with the CSS profile in some spots. So one thing that is not aligning is that the retirement value, so the second row from the bottom on the right, you have on the CSS profile, there is a question. It does make people very concerned. Why are they asking about my retirement value? How much I've saved for like the duration? You know, if you're 50-year-old and you've been saving your whole career, why are they asking me how much I've saved? And the truth of the matter is that it's not in the calculation for the CSS profile, but it is a field. I believe it is still optional. But if you leave it blank, technically the school could ask you about it. They may not ask you about it. If you fill it in and you say a number, they still may not ask you about it. It's definitely not in the calculation, I can tell you that. But it may advise them on consideration. Let's say if you appeal for more aid and yet you've saved $1 million in your retirement, they may say, well, okay, we need to, you know, this family has made decisions on saving for retirement different than than some of our other appeals we're looking at. And we only have a limited amount of funding for the appeals that come in. So we need to say no to this family. So, in other words, it advises them, but it is not something that is like a mathematical part of this world here. So, a benefit of the profile, lastly on this slide, is that it gives you 2,000 characters of space, basically, to, you know, tippy type your special circumstances and list anything that might be special to you. Like in my example of taking care of grandma, or maybe you had a loss of job or some medical expenses that were unreimbursed by insurance. You get 2,000 characters to write your story in free form and to explain it. Whereas if it's just a school, if it's a school that just uses the FAFSA and you want to tell that story, you're going to have to write a letter to do that. So you will have to like kind of have a letter ready so that you can submit it to the different institutions. But if it's if you're filing it on the CSS profile, you could put it right there. So you can kind of cut and paste from your letter and put it right in there. I mean, if I were you, I would probably have a prepared letter if you're in that type of situation, so that you can get it to the schools on a dime in a quick manner, because the time is going to be crunched this year. So you want to be able to get it to them as quickly as possible.
Pat, sorry, there was a few questions related, honestly, about the divorce situation. I know that the new, wording going forward is for who the custodial parent is the parent who provides the most financial support. But how are they actually going to prove that?
They're not.
Yeah. So, okay.
They're not. But if it is a profile school, they will potentially ask you some questions. They may require you to have that other parent fill out the profile, a separate profile, as I mentioned earlier. So it gets a little stickier when you get into the CSS profile schools, because they tend to they're asking more questions because they typically have more money to spend. So again, these are like mostly high cost private institutions that are quite selective. Some of them they're not all Harvard and Yale. They're the Villanovas of the world. They're the, I would say USC or University of Chicago types, although those schools are bad examples because I think they also have institutional applications. But there are also some flagship publics like University of Michigan, UNC Chapel Hill, University of Virginia. So they're really like top-notch flagship publics as well. And they just have a boatload of money to spend, and they want to see the whole deal before they give all that money out. So, but
can you just repeat one more time for the FAFSA and divorced parents, who needs to get an ID?
the FAFSA and divorced parent. So the parent who goes on the FAFSA is going to be the one who provides them with greater than half their support.
So you're right. So they have to figure that out, and it's going to be that one parent.
Unless that parent is remarried, in which case the step parent has to also get one.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, the step parent has to have one as well, because they have to consent for the data to come from the IRS as well.
Got it.
So this is the calculation of need. So it's the cost or the sticker price minus the family contribution that's calculated, which is not just the SAI. It's really like how much the school thinks, an individual school thinks that you can afford to pay. It's essentially like whatever their calculated contribution is. And if it's a FAFSA only school, that's going to be the student aid index or the SAI. But if it is a CSS profile school, that family contribution number could vary, because they may be offering you some favorable allowances, such as, like, let's say, for example, you have other siblings who are in like K-12, you're paying tuition for like their K-12 secondary education expenses. A CSS profile school might take that into account right from the beginning, and that is helping you in the formula. Or there may be other provisions that they're helping you with in the formula. So suffice it to say, whatever the family contribution is that the school is using, that gets subtracted from the cost, and that is in turn your need. And then they figure out how much financial aid to give you based on that need. So in this example, you've got a cost of $75,000 minus the family contribution of $35,000. Your calculated need is $40,000. So some schools can meet full need. So in this case, some schools might give you the $40,000 in aid if they're able to. But there are a lot of schools that can't afford that because they don't have the endowed funds to support beyond federal and state. They don't have the amount to fill up the gap with the rest, so they can only afford what they can afford, and it just depends upon the school. So in this example, same student, same family, cost again is $75,000 minus the actual amount of financial aid that's offered, which is $25,000. So you needed $40,000, they only gave you $25,000. So your actual family contribution or your gap is $50,000. So it's in this example, your calculated contribution was $35,000, but really it's $50,000 because they couldn't fill up your gap basically with their money. So, and then in other example, this runs the gamut here. So in some cases, I just used one example here, but if you are a family with where your calculated family contribution comes out to zero, then your need is going to be $75,000. Some schools may be able to offer you $70,000 of aid, and then they're really just leaving you with maybe a gap that you might need to borrow through a loan for $5,000 or whatever. I mean, this is one example of a gazillion that some schools are able to fill up whatever gap you have, and even if your family contribution is is calculated to be very, very low. So the new FAFSA for next year, I've talked about a lot, but I will mention a few things here. So it's supposed to have about 50 questions instead of 108. It is supposed to be simpler. It will be simpler for you guys because you're on the family side. That was the whole point. It was Senator Lamar Alexander who wanted this to happen from Arizona. He's been touting it for years, and it finally passed. And now you will be the beneficiary of that in terms of the actual process of applying. So the income pulling from the IRS, yes, it's active consent, but I don't expect that's going to be too troublesome in the application. The only troublesome thing is if you don't consent, because then there's no SAI that gets calculated. No federal aid. Yeah. So in some cases, if you're lower income or certain threshold of income, I'll say, the asset, it's not going to even count your assets. And that was always the case with the formula for the FAFSA, that coincides with the FAFSA. There's like you take data from an application, you push it through a machine, and out comes it basically uses a formula to push out a family contribution. This is pretty much what's happening. It always excluded assets for some families, but now it's actually going to exclude more. So or I should say for more families. So if you're in that situation, that will help you. It'll launch later than usual. I mentioned that already. This is what that FAFSA the FAFSA submission summary looks like that I mentioned earlier when Debbie asked about the SAI showing on it. On the top right, you'll see an SAI and it'll have a figure there. Your calculated student aid index. You can list up to 20 schools. I mentioned that before. Each person's considered a contributor and you have to get an FSA ID. I said that already. Let's see here. Yeah, I've already said all these. Okay, so I'm moving on here. The SAI is the old way was the EFC was calculated. The new way is the SAI. And that is, it's for your purposes, it's semantics because it means for your purposes, it really means it's just a different word. It's just a different phrase. Previously, the FAFSA, the way that what happened with the EFC was that it was never really your expected family contribution anyway, because it was really more of an index to give you, to say, okay, where do I fall on this chart that says how much Pell I'm going to get and that type of thing. It really, really was more of an index anyway. And the schools really gave you what they could afford to give you outside of the federal and state aid anyway. So there is a big difference this year for 24-25 in the sense that your number could actually be negative. It's never gone below 0 before, but for 24-25, like if you are a family that has, income that's going to push you down into a negative between 0 and a negative 1,500, that is really going to show the school that you are really the highest need families that are applying. It doesn't mean that you would get more aid than the cost of attendance by $1,500. It just shows the schools a little bit more about your need level. So there's going to be 3 pathways to getting a Pell Grant. So you're either going to get an automatic maximum Pell, and this year it's like $7,395, which is a lot of money. But next year, I'm not sure what the appropriations will be, but let's just call it about that. So $73.95, let's just use this year as the example. So you're either going to get an automatic maximum Pell. Now stay with me, folks, because I know this can be a little confusing, but if you want to know, will I qualify for Pell? This is the answer. And this is for 24-25 and beyond. So they're going to look at your adjusted gross income from your tax returns. It gets compared to the poverty guidelines. Fun fact is basically put out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA. The federal poverty guidelines are used to figure out like federal, programs for, food stamps and things like that. That is sort of a rule of thumb, if you will, with that is used for lots of things. And it's also being used here for Pell Grants. So if your AGI is equal to a certain multiplier of the poverty guidelines, they will automatically give you a maximum Pell. So if you kind of fall down in the low threshold of need, or I should say high threshold, you have a lot of need, you're falling into that comparison of the poverty guidelines using your AGI, they'll automatically just give you, the full maximum Pell. Let's say you don't qualify for that. What will happen is your Pell is going to be based on your student aid index. So it'll take your, it'll look at your AGI. So it wasn't enough to qualify for that maximum Pell. But what it will look at is it'll take your maximum Pell. I'm going to use $73.95 in my example, minus SAI. Let's say my student aid index calculated to be $2,000 on the FAFSA. It'll be $73.95 minus $2,000 equals $53.95. That's how much Pell I would get. If your SAI is greater than the maximum Pell, so let's say my SAI calculated to be $8,000. Well, that's above $73.95. So therefore, I would not be eligible in this category either, because my SAI is bigger than that maximum amount. So I wouldn't get any, but I get a third chance at getting Pell Grants, and that's going to be called the automatic minimum Pell. And so this would be for families to be considered in a third and final manner. And it's going to look at the AGI, adjusted gross income, from your tax return from 2022, and compared to kind of a higher threshold guideline from those USDA poverty guidelines. And so that's it. So basically, this is pathway to Pell Grants, but beyond Pell, even if you don't qualify for Pell, there's so many other things. So keep that in mind. This is not all about Pell, but a lot of families say, well, how do I know if I would qualify for a Pell Grant? And I wanted to answer that. So this is how it's going to take place next year. And then there's some other conditions too. There are some like non-tax filers may automatically qualify for maximum Pell. There's some provisions for students who are under 33, who were children of certain veterans and public safety officers who are deceased. And then there's some low income students. So there's some other nuances here that I've put in the slides. I won't spend a lot of time on here because I know we're already sitting up here late at night talking, but unless you're maybe on the West Coast, which case it's only 10 after 7. So I'll move on for the sake of time. So these items may increase your financial aid for next year. There are some provisions within the formula that are allowing more for you inside of the formula for living expenses. So it's always been the case that the formula that's attached with that coincides with the FAFSA and the CSS profile, it takes into account the fact that, hey, we've got to keep our lights on. We've got to buy general things like food, and we've got to have a place to sleep and eat, and we've got to buy the basic things. Those amounts are going to be going up next year, so that will help you. The sum untaxed income is going to be treated differently. So again, nothing's coming in from your W-2. So if you put money back in your 401k, it's not getting counted from 2022. So that's going to help you. And then if you receive child support, it was always treated as income, but now it's going to be treated as an asset. And that will help you in the formula because assets are treated more fractionally than income with the formula. So this is going to help you. If you get child support, if you receive child support, it will help you in the formula because it's going to be broken down more heavily than if it had been left in the income section. And then I think all of you are on the high school, like you have students who are in high school, but let's say maybe you have an upper class student who is already in college and you received some of the federal stimulus funding that was given during COVID. That emergency financial aid is not going to be counted as income. So if you did have like a current college student who got some of that funding, it's not going to be counted against the student in the application. Now, on the other flip side, these items may kind of decrease your financial aid eligibility potentially. Okay, this is one that everyone hates. This is the new rule about the number in college is not in the calculation. So if you have more than one in school, it's not going, it used to be, I'll simplify it here. It used to be that your family contribution calculates to, let's call it $10,000, or, I'm just going to use a round number there. The FAFSA would then, in the formula, it would divide by, let's say you have 2 in college, it would divide by 2 at the bottom line, and now your contribution would have only been $5,000 towards the student. Now it's not going to divide by 2 at the bottom. It's not going to count number in college. So that was a congressional change as well. So that was part of what Congress passed. And you can kind of thank Senator Lamar Alexander for that one, because that was also something that he was on pushing a little bit, because they thought was that, regardless of how you spaced out having your children, You shouldn't be given an advantage if you have 2 in college or 3 in college at one time versus someone who spaced them out 4 years apart, 5 years apart, 6 years apart, or something like that. So, let me tell you some good news. And the good news is, don't forget back here that your living expenses are increasing in the formula. There's some other things that are helping you in the formula that should balance a lot of this issue here. It has been said that about that the families who will basically, who would have been eligible for Pell Grants, who now won't be eligible, should only be about 4% of the population who now are kind of bumped out of Pell eligibility. But with you guys on this one, that this is one that I worry about a little bit. If it's a CSS Profile college, they are probably still going to use 2 in college, 3 in college in the formula. So you may see some generous financial aid awards from them in terms of their own money. The FAFSA only schools, I don't know how this is going to go, but I don't want anyone to go to bed tonight feeling worried about this until you actually see the numbers. But I am kind of a little concerned. And I know hopefully within the formula, there's enough that's helping you that will offset this. But if let's say your family contribution is like $50,000 that gets calculated, and if it had been divided by 2 before, that's a big difference than if your family contribution was $1,000 and now you're, that amount is that amount of dividing by 2 isn't quite as stark. But anyway,
well, and to this point, Kat, I mean,
yeah,
I personally think that parents need to, have this a little bit, apply to a range of schools. Their student needs to apply to a range of schools, not necessarily knowing how this is going to play out.
Correct. That is really good. I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. I think you need to have some choices.
Exactly.
Just in case, because if you do have more than one in school, if you don't have more than one school, then it's no big deal. But this is one I think could people are worried about it, and the schools too, because they're not necessarily able to make up the difference, in what's happening here. So it's, I don't know. So yes.
So for this purpose, you might, if your student didn't have a school that maybe was a CSS Profile school, you might want to consider one, because they may end up being able to be more generous and overcome this change in the calculation.
That's right. I know the ones I've spoken with and I've seen present at some conferences have said that they are still going to count the multiple students in college, the CSS Profile schools that I have heard. So again, I'm being sort of anecdotal with it. This is not an exact.
We won't really know, quite honestly, until kind of the season plays out.
Correct. So, yeah, I don't know how else to slice and dice it for you other than like what Debbie said, get your options, have some options. And that's the best advice of the night, I think. The family size, remember my story earlier about grandma not being counted. Make sure that if you really need to count other family members, that you're telling the school your story about that. So that they are helping you in the formula to be looking at your true expenses every month or every year, essentially. State and other tax allowances are changing as well. So it used to be that like where you live, that like, let's say, if you live in the state of Virginia, that your state or Virginia taxes were taken into account. So they're protecting you in the formula because the formula is essentially accounting for the fact that not only do you have to pay federal taxes, but you have to pay state and other taxes. Now the formula is changing and it's not going to account for that, which I think is sort of an unknown little quiet thing. But if I were you, I would probably want to pay attention to that when you get your financial aid award, and maybe just ask the question, especially if you live in a place where the taxes are high, because like if you're from a city like Boston or San Francisco or something, that's a really big amount of money that you're having to spend. And if that's not being not being accounted for in the formula, maybe that's something that the school could help you with in terms of an appeal, where they could do a professional judgment for you on it. The divorce separated thing, where I mentioned earlier about having to file with the family has to file based on who's providing more support. That is a big change, not being just necessarily who you live with. So again, as Debbie asked earlier, how are they going to verify that? They're not, unless you start getting asked by a school, in which case then you have to backtrack, because if it comes out during conversations later, then you'll have to justify everything. But do I think that's going to get verified for every family? No. And then I mentioned this earlier, businesses and family farms are now included. So that may decrease your aid eligibility if you have some net worth in your business, and or you have a family farm that's your primary resident that now has to get counted. So I think in summary, you're applying for aid. You are notified by the award, it's sent to you. It's going to show the cost, the financial aid. It's, just be cognizant of the fact that you want to make sure you're making a decision about where to go to school, looking at the full year cost, not just the one term. So not just like fall only or the first quarter of the school year. You want to look at, okay, how much is this going to cost us for one full year? And then if the program is 4-year program, you're kind of multiplying that out a little bit to determine what the family is looking at for a multitude of years. So it's not like a 1-year decision, it's really a multi-year decision. And then, oh, here you go. I guess I spoke too soon, but that's essentially what I wanted to say, is that you want to make sure you're looking at it as a multi-year thing. And then for special circumstances, again, the CSS profile allows you to put in all of this stuff in that application, but the FAFSA doesn't. So if you need to tell your story, just make sure you're telling it, because 2022 income may be irrelevant to where your situation is currently. If you had a job change or a job change of any kind where you're making less money. If you're making more money, then let them use 2022 income. I mean, because that's what they'll use. You might as well take advantage of that for at least the 24-25 year. But if you're making less money than 2022, ask them about it. You want them to consider using more your current income. And they will do it. It's very common. Medical, I mentioned before. Oh, K-12 expenses. If you are paying out tuition for other children, they might be able to take that into account, especially CSS Profile schools. They're used to hearing about that and using it in the formula. And let's see, I think I've said these other items. Sometimes you have to provide documentation. Usually I'd say you err on the side of you probably will have to provide documentation if you're appealing for more aid. Like medical expenses, let's say that's not covered by insurance or something. They might ask you for more info on that. Consumer debt is not typically considered, but I suppose it could range by a school's policy. But in general, I will say that, like, if you have consumer debt from credit cards and things like that, it's definitely not in the formula, and they may or may not do anything with it if you appeal for more aid. So I do want to caution you on that, but you're welcome to ask, especially if you have a large amount of debt. And this is all considered an appeal. So you're appealing, and then the school would use their professional judgment to essentially rework the formula and recalculate things. So it's literally putting in different data to, on the other side, push out a different family contribution number. So it's really true mathematics. You can take a look at the net price calculators that are required on every college's website. If they use the federal financial aid program, they are required to have a net price calculator. So you can kind of plug in your income and assets, and then it can give you an estimated financial aid award. Or you can use some sort of a comparison tool. I have something on the left there where you're essentially looking at school A, B, and C and how much they're offering you in financial aid, and then just kind of using that as a bottom line way to compare. You could do that with an Excel spreadsheet or good old fashioned paper, whatever you want to do. But I do think that comparing the college costs, that's what it's going to come down to when you're deciding between the schools. It's some of it's academic, some of it's social, emotional, and certainly financial. But all of that kind of goes into the decision making. And then just a few more items here, and I know we're all hanging on, and I appreciate it. You can definitely take a look at colleges that are willing to offer merit scholarships to your son or daughter, because some schools don't have merit scholarships, but many do. So that could help you if you don't think you're going to qualify for need-based aid, but you think you could get a merit scholarship. Or you've been told about a merit scholarship, that'll really decrease, that can really decrease your cost. So, definitely would help you for sure. Those outside scholarships I mentioned on the local, regional, or national level, taking advantage of everything that's offered to you, even though, I've talked to many parents over the years and they don't, we don't want to take out loans, or, we don't want the students to have to take out the loans. Truth is, like, the federal student loans that the students are offered are the lowest interest rate. You're probably going to pretty much the lowest interest rate that's out there, and have, right now they have a 1% fee, 1.05% fee. So it's not too bad. So the student loans that are offered are typically a really good bet to take advantage of if you need to, at least have a little bit of loan funding to help you get through. If you are a resident advisor, that basically means that the student is in the dorms and they are an RA, and that means that they're kind of like managing a floor or a couple of floors within the dorm. And so they're like they're like the manager, essentially. I kind of think of it that way. And they're kind of in charge of having some residents that are living there. And it can really slice off a huge chunk of money off of your bill. It's typically not a freshman level, of course, because they're new to the school, but maybe at the sophomore level or above, they could apply to be an RA, and it could either cover all of your room and board, room and food, or at least a portion of your room, the room charge and the food charge. So that can be a pretty big chunk if they were interested. Appeals I've mentioned. Starting at a community college is not for everyone, but it is for some. So that is a way to, of course, have reduced costs overall for not just the parents, but also for the students. Maybe don't need to borrow as much in years 1 and 2, and then they can transfer to a 4-year institution after their second year at a community college. A lot of people do that. It may or may not be for you. So just putting the options out there. Living at home, if you're local to the school the student is attending, or living off campus with roommates where you can split the rent by, 3 or 4 ways, that will definitely assist with reducing costs. And then this is my last slide. This is basically, finding the best fit in a financial way, academically. Certainly, do they have all the programs? Do they have the program that the student is interested in? And that's obviously a huge thing. When you walk on campus, do you feel like it's a good fit socially? Does it have that allure when you set foot on campus and it's like, oh my gosh, I really love it here, or you just don't feel it? So that all somewhat ties to the social aspects. And then certainly looking at the long-term benefits and costs, or the otherwise looking at the ROI, the return on investment. Is it worth it? And I think to get the answer to that, you kind of have to look at the first 3 bullets and say, all right, does this fit overall for the student? Is it feeling like a good long-term investment? Because remember, you're investing in your future. So the student is going to have hopefully a successful life after they leave there. So they want to You want to make sure you're hitting all of these bullets here. And that's pretty much it. So I will now see if Debbie has any more questions.
There's two major comments I want to kind of clear up. And one is about it's still the FSA ID. And I got to tell you, so if you are, let me hear your answer and I'll tell you what I saw. If you are a parent, married, filing jointly, how many people need to get an FSA ID?
2 plus the student.
Okay. I just so you know, this is now, because I was like, well, I kept, somebody mentioned in the chat that they were on a different webinar and they claimed that only one parent needed to get the FSA ID. So I thought, well, while you were talking, I did a little, Googling, and it is confusing out there because there are some reputable sites that are saying, they're still saying that only one parent needs to have an FSA ID if they are married and filing jointly.
Okay, so here's the thing about this new FAFSA. This is a great example of none of us know until that thing is live. Because we honestly we're all in the same boat here a little bit, because it's been shifting a little bit ever since, I would say, the summer, where, like I said, with the 529 plans, I mean, it was supposed to be this, and now it's shifting back to this. The FSA ID, I mean, honestly, until it's live, we may not know much ahead of time before that, if there's a change that's to be made, because there is no definitive answer.
There's no harm in both parents getting an FSA ID. It's not like
Right. I mean, they're all it's unique to you. It's like you applying, it's like you having your bank account and you have a unique username and password for that. So,
I guess, I mean, to your point, when it comes out and people actually walk through it, it will be clear who needs to use their FSA ID.
I wouldn't really panic about it right now, because you can't file it. You can't file the FAFSA anyway until December. So I would say let's wait till the guidance, if they say they're going to launch on December 15th, then go get your FSA ID on December 10th. And by that time, it will be much more clear, because we're right on top of the launch date. But until then, and I totally get it, like, if you've heard different things, because honestly, I've done webinars where the 529 plan information was X, and now it's changed to Y again. And so, at the time, that was the best information I had. But
somebody's asking, and I just want, they said, should I go ahead and get an FSA ID right now? There is no harm if you want to get one now or if you want to wait, because the process of getting the FSA ID is not going to change. And if you get an ID now, like, you're not going to have to get a different one later. It's just kind of, it's this question of who's going to really actually have to, be involved or use their ID information in terms of the process.
Right. So if you want to go ahead and get it now and have it, then you're ready. If you don't end up needing that other parent to have it, then no harm, no foul. You won't need to use it. But from what I've been hearing, the consent is required by anyone on the FAFSA.
Okay. Thank you for that. At least admitting that there's confusion.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's unfortunate that financial aid, I was just saying this to a friend of mine today. It's so unfortunate that financial aid is so confusing. And here we are talking about FAFSA simplification. It's technically supposed to be easier, and it will be in some ways. But in the first year of anything, the first of anything, it's always a little bit harder than the second year of something or whatever. So I guess we're all kind of in the same boat together a little bit. So
the other big question that came up, which actually always does, and I think you addressed it, but maybe just to repeat it, is home equity. Maybe just to repeat, home equity is being asked for on the FAFSA and the CSS profile, but how is it being used in each case, and how do people figure out the market value for the CSS profile?
So the CSS Profile schools use it. Some of them use it differently. Some of them will use it in a more conservative way, where they might only take like let's say your equity is, I don't know, $100,000 or something, $50,000. They may only take a fraction of that and put it in and plug it, it may calculate in a fractional way. Whereas some schools may say, okay, well, the house was bought in 1965 for $100,000 and you say it's worth $99,000 today. They're not going to take that. They're going to extrapolate it out based on when you bought it and how much it would be worth today if you went to sell it. So there's a lot of extremes when it comes to the CSS Profile schools and looking at the home equity. When it comes to the FAFSA schools, now that they're going to have that data on there, I don't know what they're going to do necessarily, but I'm going to venture to say they're going to take whatever you file, and it's value. You file value minus debt. That's going to be the equity that's used, and they may or may not look into that any further. So I don't know. That's another one where until I see officially how the new formula is going to look, I do think that on the FAFSA, it probably will be just whatever you report. So to your other question of market value, the market value would be, you can go to Zillow.com and you can look up your address on there and see what your home would likely sell for today, but it's not always 100% accurate or anything. It's just a ballpark. But I would say if other homes have sold in your neighborhood, maybe you could base it on that. Like the assets are going to be as of the day you file the FAFSA, whereas the income is 2022. The assets are of the day you file. So whatever your roundabout way of kind of estimating it is, you do not have to get an appraisal or anything like that. You can use Zillow.com as a tool, or you could use your neighbors selling homes in the general vicinity as an estimate. It doesn't have to be exact. It's just sort of a good faith effort for you to file that.
Okay, well, tons of information tonight, Kat. Thank you so much. Glad we could get you back with that little glitch. That
I don't know what happened there. I had a strong internet connection, and then voila, it all just poofed. Sorry about that, but thank you for so many people staying on. And like I said, I mean, until we know when that FAFSA kicks off, that's when all the questions will be answered. So hopefully this is enough to get you going.
Yeah, this is just hopefully exactly as you're saying, Kat, just to kind of give you some, guidance, a little education. So when it does open up, you're not like, I don't know, I don't understand any of this,
Yeah, but they can always use you as a resource, and Debbie knows how to get a hold of me too. So like, by all means, if we can help,
and this recording it's live. We send you the link. It's on Facebook. It's on YouTube. So you can go back. I know this was 2 hours. You can go back and kind of scroll through and look at different sections. And you can, as Kat said, send me questions. If I can't answer them, I will touch base with Kat to get her input.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
Somebody just put something in that says, we can do it. Yes, you can. You can do this.
You can do this. You can do this. We're going to get through the 24-25 year. I know it. I know it. It's all good.
Okay.
You're learning. So thank you for that.
Exactly.
Thank you, Debbie. You're wonderful.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, everybody, for staying on. I know this was a pretty long session, but hopefully worthwhile. And again, don't freak out. It hasn't even gone live yet. This is all kind of, educational to kind of give you the information before it goes live, and we'll be around when it goes live. Good night, everyone.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. Bye-bye.